What a beautiful day. It'd be a real shame if someone arted on it.
Hey everyone. Well, yesterday I got my opportunity to see Terrifier 3, and on the 13th of October, no less. And I've really got mixed feelings about it. I didn't dislike it, but I don't know if I can exactly say that I liked it either. So let me run down my thoughts, both positive and negative, in no particular order without tossing out any spoilers. First up, I gotta give massive props to the gore department. This movie is freaking full of gore effects, and most of them look really good on screen. One of my bigger issues with Terrifier 2 was when they used CGI to enhance the gore, and it was so poorly done it started to become a distraction. Thankfully, it wasn't too often. But in number 3, if they used any CGI, they did a much better job with it. This movie's practicals look phenomenal. And I gotta add that the sound effects department, they really ramped up with the squelches and the squishes, so it sounds as over the top as it looks. So kudos for that. However, as much gore as there was, I didn't find any of it nearly as impactful as I found the big scene in number 2. I think we all know what sequence I'm talking about. That one really stuck with me, and it actually took me some time to fully shake it off. In number 3, every scene I was just sitting there with my popcorn like, gotcha. Yep, that's a leg getting pulled off. Oh, yeah, mallet smashed bones. Oh, that's a lot of blood gushing out. Second of all, the Christmas setting, it was cute, but ultimately it felt pointless. It was funny seeing Art getting all dressed up like jolly old St. Nicholas, but after a while it was like when I'm playing a video game and I pick a goofy costume for my character just to switch up the look. The game is exactly the same content, but I'm just wearing a hot dog outfit or a pink tutu or whatever. It's completely arbitrary. Art's carnage wasn't nearly Christmas themed enough to justify the holiday setting. We got a whole lot of standard issue horror weapons and implements that had nothing to do with Christmas. And if you completely remove the Santa suit that he was wearing and get rid of the Christmas lights, nothing about the kill sequences would feel out of place. Like, remove that whole section of the movie, put it in another movie, wouldn't feel weird. They could have just as easily dressed him up in like a red, white, and blue outfit and set it on the 4th of July for all the good the date meant. I don't know. Maybe it's my own fault. Going into this one, I was kind of hoping to see something more like How the Art Stole Christmas. And that's really not at all what we ended up with. It was basically Terrifier on a day that ends in Y. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some Christmas-specific things that happen, but it's one of those things where it's like, they're there, but they're there just to tick a box, and now it's a Christmas movie. My third point, after the ridiculous mess of a story and sequences that we got from number 2, it was actually kind of nice to see a bit more of a grounded and somewhat linear movie. Heck, we even got some actual lore expansion as opposed to a stack of cool ideas that never really went anywhere. There were a few times that something was spoken about, or we'd get a flashback, and I thought back to the previous movie, and I appreciated them finally attempting to give it a point. However, I don't think they went nearly far enough with that. Some of the things from the previous movie feel a bit more fleshed out now that some of it got revisited, but all it really did was leave me wanting more of that. Plus, they tossed in some new shit with zero explanation, so it was like 1 step forward, 5 steps back, but we were already still about 20 steps behind from the last chapter of the series. I had previously complained about number 2 feeling like it could have had the runtime cut back by a lot and not lose anything. Number 3 felt like a much more cohesive product. But in saying that, I really do have to admit that through a lot of this movie, I had absolutely no idea where the hell Art and Sienna were in relation to each other. Like, I knew they were relatively in the same area, but was Art heading in her direction? Was he trying to avoid her and just a bunch of people got caught up in his path? I really didn't know. Honest to God, about 2/3 of this movie just felt like Art was on a Christmas road trip, and occasionally we'd check in with Sienna, who was somewhere else on this plane of existence. For all I knew, they could have been on 2 separate continents, except for the scenes when they were actually in the same room. Fourth, Art was not nearly as fun in this movie as he was in the previous 2. The comedy aspect, I personally feel, took a massive back seat in this one. He was nowhere near as entertaining as I found him in number 2, or even number 1. And that's really a fucking shame to me. The thing I love about Art is that he can be equally hilarious as he is devastatingly brutal. There were a couple of moments where I was just watching the scenes play out and I had this big goofy smile on my face. But as for laughter, I don't think I laughed louder than a slight throat clearing more than once or twice. Kind of the that was about it. Art's whole routine through this movie was pointing at or miming what was happening. And by about the 5th time that it had happened, I was starting to wonder, is that all we're going to get from him? I kind of kept waiting for Art to just pull this really funny thing to happen, and more or less it never really did. When I left the theater and I was walking back to my car, I just didn't feel right. Like, I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't put my finger on it. Something didn't feel right. And it just bothered me, and it wasn't until I was in my car and I was a few miles down the highway when I was finally able to put into words what I was feeling. It was like watching a stand-up comedian on their 3rd TV special, and after a few minutes you start wondering if they've burned up all of their A-list material on the first 2 specials. Art was very much been there, done that almost the entire movie. And what I mean by that is Art's personality as opposed to like the gore effects and things like that. I mean, I get it. Art is a silent antagonist. There's only so much you can do through mime. But he just had so much more depth in previous chapters, and it feels like almost none of that showed up in number 3. In both number 1 and 2, there's these sequences where Art is stalking his prey, and he's quite hilarious in them. In number 3, there's no stalking. He just goes in and kills people, and most of them don't even know he's there until it's too late. Yeah, sure, there's some scenes where Art is pulling off his charming routine, and you wonder if it's going to tip from ha-ha funny to horror show, and I enjoyed those scenes very much, but the total amount of laughter I experienced in this movie was the lowest so far in this series. And it's actually a very distant third. Like number 2, number 1, number 3. Can't see it. It's off camera. So, with all that said, I'm going to rank this one as my least favorite of the 3 Terrifier movies. I will say it's still fresh in my mind, and sometimes my opinions can change as I have more time to think on the movie, but those are my impressions. I've slept on it, and that's still how I feel when I woke up this morning. I want to like Terrifier 3 a lot more than I think I really do. One thing I'm actually pretty big on is avoiding news about things that I'm interested in. Generally, once I'm sold on a movie or a video game or anything in the entertainment world, I do my best to not see any further information, because sometimes you can see too much information and it sometimes ruins the experience. So I go like information embargo. Unfortunately, by the time I got my ticket, they had already made the announcement that there was going to be a fourth movie. Like, the number 3 hadn't even released to theaters, and they were like, yep, there's going to be a number 4. And while I was going into this one, I was sitting there in my seat, and I just couldn't get rid of that thought. Like, I kept thinking, yeah, well, no matter what happens with this one, there's going to be another one. And I really wished that they had saved that announcement for at least another week or two. Give us a chance to sit down and watch the movie and see how it plays out. However, after watching the movie, I am really glad I already knew that there was more on the way, because this movie left me wanting more, but for all the wrong reasons. I will definitely be there for Terrifier 4, but Damien, if for some reason you see this video, you won't. But if you do, please, please, please start working on righting this ship before it goes any further off course. You seem to get a bigger budget every round, and I'm glad that you do. But don't lose sight of why we fell in love with art in the first place. The gore is fantastic. No notes, you got that down pat. But what I feel is starting to falter is the heart and soul. Don't let that happen, buddy.